Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm glad you can be a part of this first live chat in our 6-part series about the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships Program, or Stpf for short. My name is Jessica Soule. I'm the recruitment director for the fellowship, and I will be your moderator for today's chat. This chat series is an opportunity for you to ask current alumni fellows your questions. You'll also find out what's happening at the Science Policy Interface in the federal government today. We hope that through these chats, you'll see how the fellowship can impact policy and transform your career. Before we begin, I want to highlight that there is closed captioning offered for today's session. Follow the link in the chat box. Through that link, you'll be able to access closed captioning and adjust font size, color, or style, and be able to see it on a companion device or in another browser tab. Okay, on to a few more housekeeping points before diving into the conversation. To put today's session in context, we are hosting one chat each month during the application season, May through October. Please join us for one, some, or all of them. Each chat will focus on a unique aspect of the fellowship experience, from answering the question, what's it like to be a fellow, to career impact and life after the fellowship. And each chat will feature different fellows as panelists. In case you haven't heard, the application opens on June 1st, that's next Tuesday, and closes on November 1st. Now, I'm curious, do you plan to apply? In a moment, you'll see a poll pop up on your screen, and please click the response that best matches your plans. All right, I see all the responses coming in. Very exciting. We'll share them in just a moment. All right, fantastic. Thank you all for being here. For those of you who are applying or are thinking about applying in the future, congratulations on getting a jump start on your application. And for those who might be a few years away, it's great that you're here too. There are lots of ways to learn about and engage in science policy. And for those of you who aren't sure, we're really glad to have you here too to chat with our fellows. So thank you again for sharing. All right, and since so many of you are planning to apply or thinking about applying in the future, I'd like to share a brief overview of Stpf. Since so many of you are planning to apply, here are, let's see, these fellowships are an opportunity for doctoral level scientists and engineers to spend a year contributing their expertise to federal policy, as you'll hear from our 3 panelists today. For 2021 applicants, positions are available in all 3 branches of the federal government: executive, legislative, and judicial, and you can apply to 2 of those 3 areas. Fellowships are a paid 1-year full-time commitment in Washington, D.C. And for a sense of timing, someone who applies in 2021 will be considered for a position in the fellowship class that runs from September of 2022 through August of 2023, our 50th class of fellows. While no one knows what the world will look like in September of 2022, Stpf is vigilant about keeping fellows and their families safe. We will keep applicants, who then become candidates and ultimately finalists, informed throughout the application and interview process on all pandemic-related updates connected to the fellowship. I also want to briefly touch upon eligibility. Applicants for Stpf must be US citizens, hold a doctoral degree in the sciences, social sciences, or engineering, and cannot be a full-time federal or AAAS employee. And those of you who have a master's in engineering plus 3 years of professional engineering experience are also eligible to apply. Which brings us to our next question for you all, and it relates to your discipline. Could you share what discipline you belong to, and click the discipline that best describes you or your field of study? This will help us understand who's joining. All right, I see all the responses already coming in. Thank you for clicking. Thank you for sharing. All right, we'll wait just a few seconds longer. All right. All right, and here are the results. Beautiful. Like our fellows, you're all representing many backgrounds, from biological and physical sciences to social and behavioral sciences to computer science and engineering. This diversity of disciplines is very important. The federal agencies and offices that host fellows are looking for a wide range of backgrounds and skills. And today, I think you may also hear how fellows with similar disciplinary backgrounds can have very different fellowship experiences too. And so in addition to your scientific and technical expertise, we're also seeking candidates with the following: leadership potential, maturity, good judgment, and initiative, communication, outreach, and interpersonal skills, especially to non-scientific audiences, problem-solving abilities, critical and analytical thinking skills, and a commitment to the fellowship objectives of flexibility, professional growth, and public service. Which brings us to our last question for you all before we dive into our chat. Do you know someone who is or has been an Stpf fellow? Ooh, okay, I see the responses coming in. Thank you all. Thank you for responding. All right, here's where we are. 40 of you say yes, 55% say no, and 5% are not sure. And if you already know a fellow, today you're growing your network. And if you didn't know any before this chat, you'll leave the webinar knowing 3. And today's speakers are 3 of more than 3,400 alumni around the world. So if you don't already have a fellow in your network, the program can help you connect with one. Now that we've learned a little bit about one another, on to the purpose of today's chat, to chat with our fellows. Please ask questions. To do that, click the question box in your menu and type your question in. And if you'd like, you can indicate the person or people to whom your question is directed. We'll get to as many questions as we can today. Now, I'm happy to introduce you to our fellows and panelists. First up, Dr. Diana Pankovic, who serves as a Director for Science and Innovation Policy at Pfizer, where she leads policy development for issues related to clinical trials, including enrollment, diversity, and data sharing. Diana also serves as a policy lead for issues related to patient centricity, oncology, digital health, expanded access, and supply chains. Previously, Diana worked at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, or OSTP, where she supported President Obama's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, or PCAST. And as part of the Executive Secretariat for PCAST, Diana worked on a range of topics, including private sector adaptation to climate change, forensic science, technology for aging, and ensuring the safety of the nation's drinking water. Diana received her PhD in neuroscience from Boston University and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania's Veterinary School. Next up, join me in welcoming Dr. Paul Lardy, CEO of Legray Incorporated, a pharmaceutical consulting company focused on improving access to medicines, especially in Africa. He is also an independent consultant and pharmaceutical industry best practice advisor for the National Coordination Center. Dr. Lardy is founder and was CEO of Legray Chemical Company, Ghana, the first vertically integrated pharmaceutical research and manufacturing company in sub-Saharan Africa. Dr. Lardy recently completed a 2-year Stpf fellowship in the Office of the Director at the National Science Foundation. And at the NSF, he researched and published a history of global health impacts from NSF-supported basic research. In that quest, he highlighted fundamental discoveries that eventually led to diagnostic and therapeutic tools for stemming infectious disease outbreaks and preventing pandemics. And Dr. Lardy has his PhD in medicinal chemistry from the State University of New York at Buffalo and postdoctoral training in synthetic organic chemistry at Yale University. And now let's welcome Dr. Georgia Hartman. Dr. Hartman is a current executive branch fellow, a second-year executive branch fellow, placed in the U.S. Agency for International Development in the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Hub. Dr. Hartman holds a PhD in anthropology from the University of California, Irvine. Her research examines how the shift from state-directed to market-oriented economic reforms is reshaping the meaning of land, home, and property in Cancun, Mexico. In particular, she is interested in how mortgage finance shapes urban space, social class, and gendered responsibilities associated with households in Mexico. As an economic anthropologist, she specializes in examining economic exchanges as fundamentally social entanglements that shape not only our material lives, but our relationships with families, our communities, and the societies we live in. Thank you all for being here today. And before I go to questions from the audience, I'll kick it off with one. Could you all each take a turn introducing yourself, your fellowship placement, and what motivated you to apply? For example, was there a particular experience you sought or a policy area that you wanted to work on as a fellow? And Georgia, as our current fellow, are you willing to start us off?
I am. Thank you, Jessica. It's so funny hearing that bio. It feels like another life ago. It just sounds like so academic. And I feel so far from that right now. So to that point, as far as what prompted me to apply, there are a lot of things I can say about it, but I think, for me in particular, maybe you can't tell through like the academies of that bio, but I felt like, I was studying these processes of policy for my PhD. And in some way, like, I realized I really wanted to be part of solving the problems that I was examining and not just sort of studying them and sort of extrapolating social theory from them, which is very valuable. And I draw on social theory and solving problems. But yeah, I was really interested in solving the real world problems I was seeing. And I felt that the AAAS fellowship gave me the opportunity to do that. And I mean, it has thus far, like, particularly working at USAID.
Thank you, Georgia. And Paul, I wonder if you're willing to go next.
Sure. So what got me into the fellowship? Well, I was in the private sector working for Big Pharma for decades and then struck out as an entrepreneur. And it was really exciting what we were doing in Africa. But unfortunately, we got involved with investors who didn't share our vision. So it got to a point where we said, we're going to part ways. We're going to go on, just handle the company, sell, do whatever. And so my partner is my wife, partner in crime, my wife. So we started talking, said, okay, just retiring is not going to do it for either one of us. I mean, we still have our business, but it's almost like backing away too far if we say we're retiring. So one thing we haven't done before, we've never worked for the government, and it could be fun doing it. So we talked about that, and me being the real brave guy, I said, yeah, sure, you first. And so she signed up with the fellowship, and I just saw how much of a change came in her. The excitement of she was at USAID, the excitement of going in, solving problems using her background. Her background is also in pharmaceuticals. It got me excited too. And I said, okay, this is not so bad. And so I applied, and happily I got accepted. In fact, I was worried I wouldn't be accepted. That would have hurt me to no end, because I had seen what the fellowship was about. And so that's what got me in there. And I have to say, it's one of the best things I've ever done in my life.
Thank you, Paul. And Diana?
Yeah, so thanks for having me here today, Jessica. I'm excited to talk about my experience. So for me, after my postdoc, I had the wonderful opportunity to work at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine for several years. And that really the experience there actually propelled me to apply for the fellowship for two reasons. First, at the National Academies, I really didn't have any experience around implementation of policy. So similar to Georgia, while I understood, sort of what science policy was all about, I really, really was looking for an experience where I was able to put, boots to the ground and actually try, to implement policy. I think the second piece that for me, up until that point, my career, both undergrad, graduate work at the National Academies was all related to neuroscience. And I was really looking for an opportunity to do something other than neuroscience. And I love neuroscience, and for the neuroscientists out there, fantastic field, I can't say enough, but I was really looking for an experience that would let me see other, other types of activities, other types of topics. And I really had the honor of working with President Obama's PCAST, where I did climate change and forensic science and, lead in our drinking waters after the Flint, Michigan disaster. So, beyond trying to, understand how and best practices for implementing policy, it was also an opportunity for me to learn if I could tackle challenges outside of my specific discipline. So those were kind of the two biggest motivators for the fellowship for me.
Thank you all for sharing. It's so interesting to hear common themes and also the unique experiences that brought everybody here today. And we're having a lot of great questions come in from the audience, and so I'm going to ask the first from there. So we have a question thanking everyone for being here and wondering if you could share a little bit about how you used your scientific or technical background in the office where you were placed. And saying some of you were mentored, or were you mentored or guided on how to use your backgrounds in those spaces? Diana, I wonder if you want to go first.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So I think that was a critical success in my time at OSTP, was that I was able to find people who were willing to mentor me, willing to educate me, not only on the new topics to me, but also how do you get things done, both within the U.S. government and then within the White House itself. What I did find, though, is because I was going from neuroscience to something like climate change, that was the first topic, I was able to use the skills of, being able to quickly research topics, being able to dig deep enough into the topic to understand it and kind of figure out what are the challenges and what are the opportunities. But also as a scientist, using that experience of when not to go too far and too deep into anything, and sort of, being able to quickly appreciate the breadth of the topic without getting stuck. So I think that's a great question, and definitely part of that transition from science and from the lab bench to the policy environment was propelled and helped by the mentors that I was able to find.
Georgia, I see you nodding along.
Yeah, sure. I can say more about that. I mean, again, similar to Diana's experience, I mean, I've been really fortunate to have a really, really tremendous mentor who has, been really open with me and didn't sort of expect me to know everything right off the bat, which is a bit of a cultural shift coming from academia, where I think maybe sometimes we feel like we have to know everything, or at least act like we do. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the key for me has been having that mentorship, but similarly, I think a lot of it, again, in my position, like as a social scientist and at the U.S. Agency for International Development, some of it has been intuitive. Like, what can I do? I can read documents and I can make them better. I can make sure that these questions they're trying to ask are empirical. Some of the applications have been sort of pretty obvious for me in my work.
I wonder, Georgia, if you can maybe speak a little more even to how you apply social theory to governance as an anthropologist. And I think this might be coming from a fellow anthropologist joining us.
Yeah, my gosh. I need to think about that a little bit. I mean, so early on, I found myself in these situations. So I'm a gender and environment advisor. So a lot of the people that I work with are my environment colleagues who are mostly PhDs in ecology and biology and all these things. And early on, I found myself looking at a results framework, which is something that we use a lot at USAID in order to plan sort of projects. And I kept looking at it and being like, I mean, this isn't really social theory, apologies, but I was just like, where are the people here? Like, this is a program that's supposed to affect people, but there's no people on here anywhere. And I sort of initially was like, this is so obvious. I must be just not understanding what a results framework was. But no, that was a really valuable insight and I think part of the reason why I'm there and why they want other social scientists there, because it is we have a really different way of understanding the world. For one, understanding this is an environment program, but ultimately its success depends on the people who are going to enact that project and whose lives are going to be shaped by it. And not just, the component of understanding people, but I think as social scientists, certainly as anthropologists, I think we have an understanding for the complexity of how humans interact and how society works in ways that I think seem unremarkable to us when we're in the academy, surrounded by other anthropologists who know all the same things, but that is really, really helpful and really valued by colleagues, at least at USAID.
Thank you for doing that deep dive for us there. And Paul, so Georgia, that's such a great point about the diversity of the fellows and their experiences, their background. And Paul, I think about your experience internationally within the private sector, and returning to that original question about experiences you had translating your skills in this fellowship placement, and then also any mentor experiences you had at the NSF you want to share.
Yes, thank you, Jessica. Yeah, I'd like to share. First of all, my background being a scientist, pharmaceutical discovery, and so on and so forth, I get into the fellowship and I am assigned to the NSF historian. History was one of my worst subjects when I was in school. So I was wondering, oh my God, how is this going to work? And luckily, I had a superb mentor. And I have to say, in general, most of the fellows that I encountered at NSF talked about the mentorship there. NSF runs special programs for all of the fellows consistently all the time. So that was good. Well, the way that we did it was he said, first of all, there is an odious job that is hanging around, and that is writing up the biographies of past NSF directors. There are some that have not been rewritten, and I think the best way is for you to start writing. So that was baptism by fire, and it was awesome, because then very quickly I had to know where to make copies, where to get pens, how to access the library, get information, historical information. And the things I was writing about had to do, the main thing was how the background of the director impacted NSF, how they introduced maybe a new area and so on and so forth. So that was very good. Then the second thing that happened was, because of all of my time in Ghana and so on, and being from that background, I have a strong interest in global health. So as I spoke to my mentor, we ended up that, whoa, it would be very interesting if you now did research, historical research. How has the fundamental research that NSF funds, how has that affected global health? How has that impacted? And I think that was really, really awesome thing, because I found a lot and I wrote about them. And for the NSF social media, we published them on there. And we could talk about impacts that NSF basic research has had on pandemics, on malaria, on a whole host of things. So that was the two things, being a good mentor, and the second thing, immersing myself directly into it and not wasting time at all. That's what helped me a lot.
Thank you all, and thank you, Paul, for sharing about that. I don't think I knew there was an NSF historian until today, so thank you for the work that you did. And I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat that are somewhat related, and there's a lot of questions just kind of curious about really how you did that, do the transition of going from potentially a very niche field or research field to working in an office on perhaps a wider range of projects. And I'm wondering, maybe what skills or resources really helped you make that pivot, and maybe what were some of the skills that you use more in a fellowship that you didn't use previously? Or maybe skills that you did use in academia and also in the fellowship that were transferable to be so.
I'll answer that. Sorry, that was my husband sneezing in the background. I've put a lot of thought to this. And let me also first say, this is my first year in the fellowship still, so I have had a bit of a unique experience in that it has been completely remote. I've never been to my office. I have no idea how tall my colleagues are. I do have a lot of meaningful connections with fellows, but they're still completely over Zoom. So all that being said, I will say the transition to working 9 to 5, sometimes 8 to 6, it was a shift, I mean, previously, if it was the afternoon and I was feeling a little dragging, I'd be like, oh, I'll just take a nap and then I'll get up and I'll do more work. And I can't do that now. But I got through it, I got used to it, and I learned how to prioritize different kinds of tasks when I'm feeling less productive. So I think, some of my transition has been transitioning to this pace of work. Some of it has been telework, which everybody is dealing with. But then the main point I want to make is that, to be honest, I've said this, I've realized that I think the skills that I've drawn on most are the skills that I developed in my writing group with colleagues, more than anything I ever learned in a class, more than anything I ever learned writing my dissertation. Learning how to comment meaningfully on other people's work, meaningfully and productively. I feel like in the academy, you can be like, I don't know what you mean here. Well, that's not actually that helpful of a comment. If you want people to make a change, you have to make a productive suggestion. Knowing how to speak with colleagues, being open to critique of your work in a very collaborative way. I really can't say enough how much constantly every day I'm drawing on what I learned through my writing group with friends. And on that, let me just say, one of the things is actively listening. I've had people, and in one particular meeting, I basically listened to everything everyone said, and then I sort of repeated it back to them, and people were like, oh, that's a really great comment. And I was like, all I did was listen to you and write it down. But I was like, that's a skill I developed with my writing group. So I would say those are some sort of key skills that I have drawn on a lot in this year.
Thanks, Georgia. And Diana and Paul, does any of that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think the one skill that was really helpful. So some things did not transition working in OSTP. I went from long hours to longer hours, and from protocols to sort of flying a little bit by the seat of my pants, depending on the situation, depending on who I was talking to. I will say this though, I think the one biggest skill that I think I intuitively knew as a graduate student and a postdoc, but I don't think I really, until someone said, and someone, one of my mentors kind of said, it's okay to say you don't know, and that you'll find out. And I think that, as a graduate student, you're always saying, I don't know, what's next, what's going on. And even as a postdoc, especially if you do something different as a postdoc from graduate student. But I think that was, for me, it was really interesting. It was really helpful. And a really quick anecdote is I'm working on climate change. I'm a neuroscientist. I don't know climate change. Luckily I was able to get on the phone with someone at the Department of Energy. We're chatting. I said, look, conversation wasn't going great. Finally, I said, I'm going to be honest. I'm a AAAS fellow. I'm new to climate change. I really don't know this field. I'm looking for help. I'm looking for some ideas. The first words out of his mouth are, really, what year? I was a AAAS fellow, blah, blah, blah. And I think that I don't know opened a door, and he said, hey, why don't you, let's figure out a time, sit down, I'll get some people together, we'll brief you, we'll get you up to speed. And I think that the curiosity that you develop as a scientist and a graduate student and a postdoc, and sort of, thinking about hypotheses and thinking about questions, I think that curiosity for me is what really was very helpful, and probably was a foundation for the success I had at OSTP.
For me, a very interesting thing happened. I thought I had a really great skill that I was bringing to the table, and that is writing. I mean, I had publications, I had written things back and forth. And so here I am with a historian. The historian's office is in the Office of Legislative and Public Affairs. That is the nerve center for communication from NSF to the world. So pretty much everything goes through there and it goes out. So I'm right there in the middle of action. So the very first thing I wrote and I gave to my mentor, the mentor said, oh, this is not bad, but now you have to give it to the copy editors. And he went to the copy editors and it came back dripping in red ink. And it's a lesson that I learned. As a scientist, if you read the American Chemical Society style guide, the way we were taught to write is all in the passive tense, passive. So, this was added to that and that was obtained. And they told me, you've got to change immediately because we don't communicate that way. You're communicating to the world. You don't communicate that way. So the style guide that we use here is the AP style guide, the Associated Press style guide. Here is your link to it. Use that to check how you should communicate with people. And boy, that was awesome. Copy editors became great folks to me. And I have to say that those lessons have helped me a lot because as I come out and I have to write things, for example, reports that I have to write on, say, an African pharmaceutical project. I know how to now read over and over again to make sure that I'm communicating to people who have no background in the area. Although they have a background in the area, I will still now communicate in a better way than I used to do. So that was very helpful, and it's something that has helped me since the fellowship.
Thank you all. It was so interesting to hear the commonalities, some of the themes that came out, a lot about communicating, active listening, the writing and editing skills. Diana, I love the way you put that I don't know opened a door. This fellowship is so much about contributing expertise, and it's also about that learning and professional growth. And so thank you all for highlighting that. We're getting a couple of questions about the nitty-gritty, about what is a day like as a fellow. And I know that's a tough question because there isn't one day, but I'm wondering if one of you would like to share, was there a typical day and what did that look like for you? Maybe Diana?
I think if I had to crunch down a typical day, so, it was a real honor to work with PCAST. These were the top the nation's top scientists and engineers and academicians and industry folks. I think a typical day was, for me, actually, let me go backtrack. I'm really happy there wasn't a typical day for me. How about that? Let me answer by a non-answer because I get bored easily, to be honest. I'm sharing a little bit too much here maybe, but I can tell you, part of my role was, PCAST was tasked to provide President Obama with recommendations on specific topics. So part of my day was talking to individuals at different agencies that might be the target. I say that not in a bad way, but kind of they may be the target of a recommendation by PCAST to find out, if PCAST makes X recommendation, is this something the agency could do? How much budget would it need to accomplish it? I also, a lot of times going outside of the government into, talking to experts just to understand sort of what were the kind of topics that resonated. And then I think the third thing that I did a lot was trying to connect PCAST with the right people, the best that they could talk to, both within and outside the government, standing up workshops for them, really trying to make sure that they had as much information as they possibly could need in order to make really evidence-based recommendations to the president. So that was kind of my role in a nutshell. That being said, there was always a fire drill or a bomb here or there. As a neuroscientist and OSTP and one of the few biologists at that moment in time, I would sometimes, get a request like, hey, do you know anything about gene therapy? Let's chat. So there really wasn't a typical day, but I think the cool thing about the fellowship for me was that there wasn't, there was always so much to do and so much to learn. And I think a lot of the time I spent talking to people and listening and trying to figure out who's the best person to talk to who.
Paul or Georgia?
I can go,
or
I'll let Paul go. Go ahead.
Well, I think Diana just put it right. There was never really a typical day. I could put maybe things in there. Okay, so I am going to read a lot. I'm going to write. I am going to interview people. I learned how to take oral history, the questions to ask, to get the answers, and it's all recorded and then it's transcribed for me. So you can imagine if I'm working on, say, a new device for detecting disease mosquitoes, I have to now do an oral history interviewing the scientist who worked on it, somebody in academia who got the grant to do that study. The next day, it will be a totally different subject, and the response that I get from the person could be different from the response I got today. So you don't really know what you're going to feel. For me, that was one of the more exciting things, because I'm looking forward, oh wow, I'm going to be talking to this guy about this really awesome thing. And I can't wait. The style is never the same. Somebody just wants to talk on the phone. Some people I actually visit. I go to their laboratory and I interview them to get the oral history. Others will just send me material. So it was not typical. Any day was not the same, except for, I think 6 cups of coffee a day. That's about it.
I can say a little bit about my typical day. Again, keeping in mind that I've only teleworked, and so we'll see what it looks like if I ever go into the office. I would echo exactly what Diana and Paul have said, to the extent that there's no such thing as a typical day, especially when you're in the middle of a presidential transition that amounts to a 180 in a lot of the main policy areas that you work on. Which for me at the intersection of gender and environment and climate is a lot of them. But that being said, I will say that my day is just meetings all day. And I think Zoom has made it even exaggerated it. I'm clicking, ending one meeting and going straight to the next meeting. There's some days that I have an hour where I don't have a meeting, which is kind of wild. Answering emails. I realize these are sort of bland answers, but this is just sort of what it looks like. That being said, I guess I can also say a little bit about the kinds of work that I'm doing, if that's helpful, the kinds of problems I'm solving when I'm in those meetings and when I'm answering emails. So, I am managing standalone projects like Surveyor, which is a partnership between USAID and NASA that uses geospatial technology to help inform local policymakers on decisions about like agricultural forecasting and all kinds of things, and climate change. So like I will be helping to manage a program like that, making sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, reading work plans, monitoring and evaluation plans. Sometimes I'll be working on agency-wide stuff. Right now, the agency is developing a new climate strategy, so I'm helping with that and helping to build the evidence base for that on the subject of science policy. We also get these like taskers sometimes, what we call taskers, which is like, Ambassador Power is meeting with Secretary Kerry, like comment on these talking points, due in 1 hour. The G7 is meeting, like comment. And so that's pretty cool. Ultimately, whatever I put in, like, might just be like one word that makes it to the actual thing that happens. But yeah, that's a little bit of kind of what the content of my day is.
Thank you. And I appreciate that pivot of it's not only about the what you're doing, but really the why you're doing it, and finding that motivation and finding that connection to your background, to your research questions, to what you said at the beginning, Georgia, of wanting to help solve some of these things that you're exploring as a researcher. I wonder, this is a question that just came in. Did you have any assumptions about government or public service going into the fellowship? And do you still have them, or do you no longer have those assumptions? I see some smiles. I see some nodding. Paul, anything from you? Oh, go ahead, Diana.
No, go ahead, Paul, please.
Oh yes, assumptions going in, although people did tell me that those assumptions were wrong. I figured that, people will be laid back in government. Having gone through the pharmaceutical industry, every time it's fighting, and so on and so forth, I figured, people will just be laid back. And I was really surprised. People do work hard, and I mean hard. And that really impressed me a lot. I kept telling myself that this country is in good hands because people would just work until the job is done. And that was one assumption I had that very quickly dissipated. And I was happy to see that.
So I had two assumptions that were completely broken. So the first was, I thought government was slow, because everything I saw externally was kind of saying, oh, it takes this long for regulation to come out, and it takes this long for, this kind of something to happen, or wait, how long, I kind of sitting outside the government, I was like, wait, how long did it take for that to happen? And being inside the government and inside OSTB, no, I mean, absolutely not. There's so much going on, and there's so much that it takes to implement a policy or develop a policy, understand, the evidence base for the policy. So the assumption of slow was completely broken. It's fast. I think the other thing the assumption that I came in with is that government was very process heavy, and there's a lot of protocols and very much A to B to C, you kind of you do first and then you do second. And what I found is you can break that, and not in a bad way, but you can disrupt it, and you can, with the focus on helping society, and with the focus on, serving the American people, I saw it and was able to break some of those processes to get things done. And I think also, and I may have had a different, I may have had a different fellowship experience than other fellows out there, because I was in the last 2 years of the Obama administration. We were under a deadline. We were out of a job, and so as time went faster, the advice from President Obama and from Dennis McDonough, his chief of staff, was, this is the fourth quarter, folks. This is it. Do it. Get it done. And so I really learned that, not only can government go fast, but you can break those processes if you have an end goal. And our goal was always, for the betterment of science and society. You can break things and get stuff done.
So assumptions. I think, again, coming at this as an anthropologist, and I don't want to say that I had all these assumptions, but it's definitely one that I've seen a lot from anthropologists and other social scientists, and I had them on some level as well, as a discipline that is very focused on critique and critique of the state as a central thing that it's engaged in. I was really, let's say, I don't want to say surprised as much as delighted to learn that the people who work in the government are not they're extremely intelligent people who care very much about what they do, and they're here for your critiques. They're not stupid. They're very smart and they care and they want to hear your critiques. But if you're going to offer a critique, you need to offer a suggestion on what should be done differently. And I think, that's I think the biggest thing for me is just really understanding, the state or the international development complex, not as a kind of monolithic thing, but really understanding it as this kind of collection of people and processes, and quite honestly, an opaque bureaucracy that even when in it, one doesn't completely understand. I think that's been a lot, let's say, humanizing of the government, and just again, echoing, what Paul said about people work very hard and they care a lot.
Thank you for sharing those. I was surprised by everything you all said, and I love that there were some commonalities and themes, and that there was so much learning about the people you were working alongside, shoulder to shoulder to, in the federal government. And Georgia, your point makes me wonder about, there's this eye-opening effect of being the fellow for a year or for two, and I'm wondering how the fellowship and your time in government played a role in the work you're doing now, or the things you're passionate about, or for you, Georgia, even just your thoughts about a career post-fellowship.
Yeah, I mean, those are a lot of questions. I think for me, I would very much like to continue what I'm doing after the fellowship, and I think about going back to the academy. If I ever did that, it would probably be in something very much sort of practically focused, for what that's worth. And let's see, what was the other part of your question? What I wanted to do, and then what was the first part of the question? Apologies.
No, I think because, for Diana and Paul, you have a little bit of distance from your fellowship, you might speak more directly to what you're doing now. But yeah, Georgia, I do wonder if just even your interests have changed now that you've going through this fellowship.
I mean, yes and no. I would say no to the extent that I think that, for me anyway, the fellowship has been a kind of not so much a 180 as it was a 360 of the reasons why I went to go to grad school in the first place. I had questions about the world and how it worked, and I explored that, and I got answers to some of those questions, and I had more questions from those questions. And now I get to use that to sort of solve problems that I hope help people, and are certainly very interesting problems for me. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's more been a realization of things that I knew were always there, but I got kind of swept up in the tide of, in the current of the academia, like now you apply for jobs and now you do postdocs and now you apply for tenure and then, you know, you get tenure and then you do whatever you do when you get tenure. And so I've just sort of been a realization that of something that I think I'd always wanted to do and been curious about, but sort of forgot about being swept up in the academic current.
So, I mean, I'm several years out of the fellowship, you know, 4.5 years, something like that. And I think the transition for me was a little easy, simply because, if you recall, one of the reasons I wanted to do the fellowship was to figure out, could I take on other topics and other challenges and move beyond neuroscience. And so having to learn quickly about, you know, various topics, forensic science. I knew nothing about forensic science, and you know, having to support a massive PCAST report on forensic science. So I was able to take that skill set. I was able to take the evidence. This is going to sound, this isn't the best construction of a sentence, but take the evidence of the necessity of an evidence base to develop good policies, and the ability to learn quickly on different topics as they come up, and transfer that over to Pfizer, where I am right now doing science policy, and my portfolio is quite diverse there, and especially in comparison to some of my colleagues who have a bit more, you know, narrowly focused. So I think those were all really great skills. I think also that assumption that, you know, you can't break things, you can't be a disruptor within a massive organization. I learned that I could do that at OHTP, and I took that passion and made it very clear in my interview for the Pfizer position, and every day in conversations with colleagues, I'm always asking, well, how can we disrupt this? What else can we do for patients? I know that may sound a little cheesy, but I think those kinds of passions and skills and, you know, philosophies of approaching, you know, challenges that people face, for me was something that I was really able to transition from the White House over to now doing, you know, clinical trial policy, for example.
So in my current position back in the private sector as an entrepreneur and as a consultant, I have had the opportunity to consult for, say, the West African Health Organization on pharmaceutical policy, for the African Union Gain on Pharmaceutical Policy on the pharmaceutical manufacturing plan for Africa. And guess what? First thing, I applied what I learned on how to write a policy brief. I don't know what I would have done if I've had something like that before my fellowship, because I'm able to concisely express things to politicians and to people in ministries and so on, who have only a very short attention span. Hit the point now, or you probably miss it for a long time. And the fellowship, the training that we had in the fellowship, and this is the great thing, aside from what you do in the office you are assigned to, there is all the other training that comes with the fellowship, all the other training. So how to write policy briefs, for example, I didn't have to do a lot of that at NSF. I did that once, but it was a skill that I got that I'm using now. And it's something that I treasure a lot. Also, interviewing people, you want to get to the bottom of something, you have to do something. The sort of questions that you ask, the active listening, as Georgia spoke about earlier on, how helpful that is when you're talking to people, trying to get information so that you can help solve a problem. So these were all very valuable skills that I am applying today.
Thank you all. Thank you. And I'm realizing that we are coming up on the hour, sadly. This time has flown by together. And so I have just one more question for you all. And Paul, it might connect back to something I think you said in your introduction, which was when you applied, you were worried that you might not be accepted. And I'm wondering, now on the other side of it, if you could look back, what advice would you give yourself, or what pep talk would you give yourself at the time that you applied? And, thinking in mind of people who are listening now, thinking about whether they should apply this year.
Yeah, the advice I would have given myself was don't be afraid. So you don't get accepted, so what? Try again next year. Yeah, but I was a little worried, and especially it's something that was also good, and it was a sign of things to come, right? The little brief that you challenged to write, and you challenged to write this brief in an area that you're totally unfamiliar with. Mine was on big data. For Christ's sake, I didn't even know what big data was. But right at the beginning, even the application stage, the challenge to learn and the opportunity to learn was right there. So that is the advice that I will give. I'm telling you, once you go through just the beginning, having to learn about policy briefs, for example, and being challenged to write a policy brief, and having an interview and being asked to answer questions on the brief you've written, even if that year you don't get accepted, these are very valuable things you would have learned because you've been challenged to learn something new. And so that's the advice I will give. Do not be afraid, jump in. I was, and I pushed my wife forward and I sat back like the coward I am. But then, luckily I got in. So that's my advice. Don't be afraid. Just jump in. Doesn't work out first time and you really want to do it, try again the next time.
I think if I were to, so I guess I stumbled into my own advice. It really didn't occur to me to try and find alumni fellows to talk to, and I kind of stumbled into it and wealth of information, and I think that's why my application was successful. So honestly, everyone on this call today has already kind of hit my advice on the head, and I think again, talking to fellows that are either currently in the offices you're interested in or alumni fellows, I got really good nuggets of information on how to best apply and kind of what they might be looking for and interview tips and stuff. So I think everyone here has already taken that first step, so I think that's great.
Yeah, and I'll, honestly echo both Paul and Diana's advice that, apply. You never know if you don't. The only thing that's certain is you won't get it if you don't apply. And if you really want it, then go get, keep applying. And to that end, also don't be afraid insofar as oh, maybe you don't want to work in government. Well, you don't have to stay in the fellowship for 2 years if you don't want to. It's still a really valuable experience for you to have. And, echoing what Diana said about, I strongly, strongly support reaching out to alumni fellows, current fellows. The AAAS Stpf crew is a pretty open and excited bunch. They want to talk about it. And I had a conversation before the interview with a fellow on Twitter who was just hey, does anybody want to meet and talk with me? And I was like, yes, of course. And I talked to her for an hour. I didn't know her at all. And she just was a wealth of information. And I strongly, recommend reaching out to current fellows because they can give you insight too into oh, the briefing memo feels so scary. But, okay, they don't expect you to be an expert on this. That's part of the point of this exercise is how well do you respond under pressure to be given this, they know they're giving you an impossible task. So they're not actually testing you on, how much you know about big data. It's sort of a different thing. So yes, I strongly recommend reaching out to fellows and apply. It's fun. And I'll just add to that about the briefing memo. That is the other thing that I find I draw on constantly is I developed a lot of skills in the process of writing my briefing memo that I feel constantly every day. I'm oh, another skill for my briefing memo. So yeah,
Thank you all. Thank you for sharing that collective wisdom. It is wonderful to hear. I appreciate that curiosity, the learner's mindset that we can just take with us no matter what we're doing into our next steps. And speaking of curiosity, thank you for everyone who was joining, asking questions. It was wonderful to hear from you all. And so just a reminder, our application opens on June 1st. You can visit our website to read more about the program. We'll send you a recording of this chat if you want to revisit it in the coming days. And then the next chat in the series will be June 17th. It's actually going to be the first of a two-parter of what's it like to be a fellow. And part 1 will focus on a year of service. Part 2 will focus on a year of learning. And if we couldn't get to your question today, please email us at fellowships@AAAS.org. It's on the screen, and we can continue the conversation there. Thank you again, everyone. Diana, Paul, Georgia, enjoy the rest of your days.
Thanks, everyone.